Hey
Jeff, how you
guys,
doing?
how's it going?
That's
Boom.
great. How have you been following? Well, first, welcome to the stream. Can you do a little
Just too
introduction?
eager.
But then
Just
I
ready
want
to
to hear
jump
your
in.
reaction to the Llama 4 news, how you're processing, and what it means for your business.
For sure, yeah. I'm Jeff Huber, the co-founder of Chroma. We're working on retrieval for AI and broadly working with developers kind of across the ecosystem to build production systems with AI. A lot of it is focused on, business applications, good old-fashioned business process automation.
hmm
And so always super excited to see new open source model drops.
Can we go to this post from Sean? He says, unpopular opinion right now, but Llama's 4 10 million token window will finally actually end the long context versus RAG debate, but not in the way that other guy is thinking. What does he mean by that?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think, Silicon Valley has a tendency to be sort of extremely intellectually shallow. This is both a strength and a weakness of the Valley, to be clear.
Yeah.
And in our view, AI is not this Deus ex machina, this technical machine god, where all of the information of all time is always going to be in the weights of this model. This is really just a new form of computing. And so in the same way that we have a memory hierarchy in classic computers, right? We have the CPU, RAM, disk, and network. We are also going to have a similar memory hierarchy in language models. And again, it already exists today. We have the actual sort of transformer attention heads. We have the context window. We have the retrieval system
Mhm.
and tool use. And these things have different trade-offs, right? You think about kind of access, speed, capacity, and cost. There are trade-offs to all of these things. I think saying something is dead plays pretty well on Twitter.
Always.
I've actually gotten myself into some trouble where some people were allegedly shitposting and not actually sort of sincere posting about this,
Yeah,
and I didn't know, right? Because it's sort of hard to tell what's a shitpost and what isn't.
of course.
But the bait is strong on Twitter. And so what Sean is saying is actually that there's a certain class of people who are long context is all you need. Again,
hmm
these people are probably 21 years old. That's fine. We love them, but they just haven't seen how real systems depend on trade-offs between speed, cost, and accuracy.
hmm
And 10 million tokens is not a panacea. You need to keep information outside of the context window. You need to give developers and programmers control over what information is inside the context window. Even these needle in a haystack tests
hmm
are not actually that representative of real world utility and reliability of long context windows.
hmm
They mentioned in the training for Llama 4, they don't even have passages that are longer than I think 250,000 tokens. And so
Yeah.
anything past 250,000 is just synthetic data is just made up. And so what Sean is saying is that well, what 10 million tokens is finally context window for Llama 4 is finally going to put to rest is that long context windows are all you need. He's
Yeah.
going, the 10 million context window length is going to finally, hopefully, make people understand that no, there are different things here that are good at different things, and we can put them together to create a good system.
Should we monetize the eschaton?
I don't know how you knew that I was writing about this morning. No, we absolutely should not. Yeah, we absolutely should not. It's always been a trail of tears. Let's not do that.
Yeah, you explained that to me a while back. I had fun with that. So let's talk about Llama 4. How should startups be thinking about Llama 4 as a tool in the toolkit against the other options that they have?
Yeah, I mean, I think Twitter is quick to, and research in general, right, is quick to sort of view state of the art as the only thing that matters.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that actually, in many cases, being first is overrated. We've seen, going all the way back to sort of the Slack and Teams charts, right?
Oh
You've
yeah,
seen the famous chart,
yeah.
Slack versus Teams, right? Distribution is incredibly important as long as, sort of the incumbents can wake up and can catch up. I would not bet against Zuck and $100 billion of profit per year. I think that Zuck also is in some sense playing a different game. He's not trying to build the sort of very best open source chat experience for consumers.
Mm-hmm.
What Zuck sees, I think rightly so, is that having an open source model which is really good is good for the ecosystem and is good for Meta. And most businesses don't love using closed source models. They want to use open source models for all kinds of reasons. Privacy, security, continuity, cost. You can build your startup on GPT-4 and it's amazing. And then there's a new version out, and OpenAI deprecates the old version, right? And all of a sudden, all of your prompts don't work the same. And so open source models are going to continue to play an extremely important part in the ecosystem. Now, obviously, like, the DeepSeek R1 launch a few months back, like totally took everybody from surprise. I think we're still in the early innings of this stuff where like good ideas can come from anywhere. And
Mhm.
oftentimes good ideas do come out of the sort of groupthink, context of Silicon Valley, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I wouldn't bet against that.
Do you think there's an opportunity to build a company like Red Hat in Linux, but for LLM implementation on top of something like Llama? Or is that like a crazy idea that doesn't really match to the modern foundation model landscape?
I mean, the bull case for Llama for Meta is that it's actually more equivalent to how Meta open sourced its data center
Mm.
kind of layout and
Yeah, yeah,
tech stack, right? And that's the bull case for Meta is that actually in industry sort of forms around that and
yep,
becomes the standard, right? That's sort of why, what argument for sort of why they did it.
yeah.
In terms of like the Red Hat 4, I think that like Red Hat 4 works well for operating systems,
Hmm.
but I don't think of an LLM as an operating system. I think
Hmm.
an LLM is much more like a CPU,
Hmm.
right? It's an information processing unit. And so obviously it's a new thing. It's not exactly like a CPU. But yeah, I'd have to reason about that some more. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
If you're running Meta AI, what would you do from here?
Hmm.
Not to put you on the spot or anything.
Yeah, to be clear, I'm not running Meta AI. I've not received that job offer at all. I mean, I think that like, you have to keep going. You can't stop. I think focusing on like the business use cases is pretty important. I think focusing actually also on what developers actually need and want out of models is also very important.
Hmm.
You see a lot of like model drops that come out, but they don't actually provide the real hooks. And they do very well in the benchmarks, right? They do very well on like kind of the public leaderboards. But they don't actually provide the hooks that developers need to do like good tool use
Yeah.
or reliable structured data output or the practical stuff, right? The developers actually want out of models.
Hmm.
And so like if you want to create a groundswell of developers that like love your tools, like do the developer experience part, like meet them where they are and like give them all the hooks that they need. And don't just stop at like, hey, look, we hit state-of-the-art benchmarking, aren't we special?
Yeah. Is there a narrative here where maybe they're trying to do everything all at once and instead should focus on like Llama is amazing at code, or Llama is the next version of Llama 5 is like all about tool use, or
Hmm.
super great at reasoning, or just like the best at deep research, or just the best at image generation, for example. Like it
Yeah.
feels like there's kind of a bifurcation of the market, and maybe the opportunity is actually to laser in on something that's high value, but then let the other stuff kind of simmer out there amongst other teams.
I mean, focus is probably always a good, lesson for all of us, right?
Hmm.
Do less and do it better.
Yeah.
And so, presumably it's also true for Meta. I think also, obviously, unlimited capital can both be a blessing and a curse in that
Yeah.
way. Yeah, again, like focus on developers.
Yeah.
Focus on what developers want. I think that's the beachhead. That's how you win the B2B market. If
Hmm.
you win the B2B market with your open source models, like you get all of the sort of downstream effects that you want. You don't need to beat, GPT-5 on
Yeah.
some.
Yeah. Do you think that part of the narrative that we're seeing around Llama 4 is just pre-training scaling, hitting a wall, a need for new algorithms, a need for a deeper focus on reasoning, and maybe even whatever comes after that?
I mean, so you mentioned a moment ago, sort of the, hypnotizing the eschaton, right? Throughout history, every exponential that we've observed eventually results in a sigmoid curve, right?
Sigmoid. Yep.
You remember early COVID, right? Sort of
Yep.
the furor of like, oh my gosh,
Yep.
the Twitter guys doing their thing where they're like, well, if double the amount of people get it every day, then
Yep.
everybody on Earth will have had it 7 times in the
Yeah.
next
100 billion people will have it
yeah, exactly,
eventually.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so, I think that there are laws of physics here. I think that
Yeah.
there are, they're clearly diminishing marginal returns, right? We're sort of spending 10x on
Yep.
compute. We're not getting 10x or better models,
Yep.
at least evidently not yet.
Yep.
And so, the transformer is incredible, is amazing. It's technology is probably as important as the invention of electricity. It will probably, bring about a increase in GDP that is on the order of the Industrial Revolution or greater. And so I think we should not like minimize this technology and
Yeah.
sort of boil it down to, oh, this is sort of just dumb pattern matching,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? By the same token, we also should not believe that all technology we're going to be able to rent seek on sort of forever.
Yep.
So yeah, new things are definitely needed. I think that like inference time compute, internal chain of thought is really promising.
Mhm.
I look at the stack today and I think about how sophisticated computers are, right, and how computer architectures are, and operating systems, and kernels, and compilers, and all of this stuff. And we're just like in the baby phase today of AI. Like
Yeah.
it's just in its infancy, and there's a lot to build.
From a recruiting standpoint, have you run into some of these super aggressive non-competes that we're seeing? There was a headline today about, Google basically paying engineers to not
work at Chroma,
not work for a year when, they could be working at Chroma or any of these other labs.
I mean, yeah, airplane red dots.png, right? I guess like if I was affected by that, I wouldn't know it. So
Yeah.
Can you take us through some of what Chroma is building today and where customers are getting the most value? I've talked to you a little bit about some of the use cases, and I think they're underrated potentially in like how simple and obvious they are when you explain them, but I want you to take me through some of the modern context.
Yeah, I mean, you've heard left and right on the internet now for like 3 years all about this acronym RAG. Well, I don't know why anybody would ever name something RAG. That seems like a pretty dumb idea. We just call it retrieval. And of course, the idea with retrieval is that if you want to build an AI system and you want to be good at something, well, you need to teach it how to do that. You got to teach it about your data. You got to give it your instruction set, right? And updating the weights of the model is not a very good idea because you cannot really deterministically control that, right? You can fine tune, but what you're going to get at the other end, again, you don't really control. And so giving the system access to a repository of instructions or knowledge about your organization, your business problems, that is something that you can control. And that's the problem that retrieval solves. And so, we talked to like enterprises and businesses building like useful applications. I think like today, 90+% of it in enterprises is retrieval augmented generation, or it's, using retrieval. It's sort of a chat on top of unstructured data. I think if you zoom out though and view like what is really AI, right? AI gives us the primitives and the ability to process unstructured data in a common sense fashion. And you think about the scale of data, right? Like even today, like inside of enterprises, like unstructured data is like 10 times the size of unstructured data. We have 10 times more unstructured data. And then you consider like the real world, right? If we were actually like putting robots out in the real world, like how much unstructured data they're going to be ingesting and needing to process and reason about and action on. And like, it's just sort of like, going to be 1,000x, 10,000x, 100,000x the data that we have today. And so like, that's kind of the direction I think is like not so much like sort of this, simple, like one human, one AI talking in a chat stream back and forth. But it's like real embodied intelligence, which, you could call an agent, you can call a robot. I don't love any of these terms, but like really the goal here ultimately, I think for anybody who's building something practical is building something that's reliable. You think about like we've been seeing self-driving touted as like this technology for like 10 years. And of course, if you live in San Francisco, you can use Waymo and it is actually incredible, but it's taken 10 years. The gap between demo and production has always been so great in AI. And so if you're building something practical in AI, your big question as a developer is like, okay, the demo is super sexy and cool, but how do I actually make it work really, really, really well and reliably? And so the ability for these systems to sort of like self-improve or improve under human guidance, I would say is like the biggest thing that's underrated today. And of course, we think that like retrieval plays a key part in kind of how that happens.
Can you concretize that a little bit by walking me through like a potential use case for us? I mean, we stream 3 hours a day. We're probably emitting, I don't know, tens of thousands of tokens every day. If I used Whisper, I transcribe every minute of our show. I could search that through, fuzzy search or deterministic. If I want to just search like every time I mention artificial intelligence directly, find that. Or I could try and fine tune Llama 4 on it. And maybe it just hallucinates like, oh yeah, John was talking about this randomly. How would I use Chroma to create a more definitive index of every time John or a guest has talked about artificial intelligence or llama in hundreds of hours of video? Is that something you could do?
Yeah. I mean, we're seeing some like kind of fun things today where like, people are taking the corpus of all of their writing or all of their speaking and they're kind of like, quote, teaching the model it. They're loading it into a tool like Chroma, they're hooking it up to a language model, and they're giving end users the ability to like chat with John see what John thinks about artificial intelligence, right? And that's exactly right. So kind of all those transcripts get processed, they get broken into pieces, they get indexed and searchable in various ways. And then when the user asks the query, hey, John, what do you think about the latest, Llama release? Or maybe they don't say Llama, they say like the latest release, the latest AI from Facebook thing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Llama.
Yeah.
Like the search is good enough that it can like find all the relevant things that you've said, and then
Yeah.
the LLM can like respond as you,
Yeah.
because it can kind of ground itself in the things that you've said before. So like
Yeah,
that's
so it's basically taking like different blocks of text, different ideas, and then kind of vectorizing them into some way that's not necessarily human readable, but
Yeah.
it can still. It's basically like better fuzzy search in many ways. Not to degrade what you're doing, but it's
No, no,
amazing.
no.
It's magical and super powerful.
Fuzzy, yeah. I mean, fuzzy search is really useful
Yeah.
in particular when people like are not, experts in their own data, right? Instead of your Google Drive, you
Totally.
know how to search for stuff pretty
Yeah.
well, right? But
Yeah,
like
yeah.
your users don't know how to search for the stuff that you've said before, and so
Totally.
that's the kind of the power of like embeddings in vector search.
Yeah, yeah.
As a tool in the toolbox, it's not a panacea. Again, we're
Totally.
not monetizing the eschaton here. We're not too messianic, right? But it's like a very powerful tool, and people are getting a lot of value out of it. Yeah.
I'm curious your reaction to AI 2027. If our point of view, generally, just from all the conversations we've had, is that like sort of model progress and advancements could sort of slow, and that would be fine just because there's so much value to unlock out of the underlying models. I'm curious to think how you processed just the forecast generally. And maybe take it from there.
We think the capability overhang we have in the models that we already have today and we will have absolutely in 6 months is immense. You think about, for example, the possibility of democratizing access to state-of-the-art services to everybody on Earth. Like it is very possible the poorest people on Earth today, or in 10 years, will have access to better healthcare, better legal representation, better financial services than like billionaires have today. I think that's like entirely possible, and that's impossible with the models we have again today. And so the capability overhang is immense. Every time an extremely long essay from a sort of effective altruist drops, right? They clearly tend to make waves. I think if you tell people that the world is going to end, they're going to pay attention. And I'm just like not that, frankly, that interested in like secular eschatologies about apocalypse and the end of the world, right? Like, I think like there's a natural tendency for all humans to believe that like we are the chosen ones living in the special time and the last days, right? Even Fukuyama, right? Wanted to sort of like end history, right? And so the natural human tendency, this is again the immunizing the eschaton. We'll mention it 3 times now. Tendency. It's really dangerous, right? Like you think about like what's happened throughout the last 100 years in like really, the hundreds of million people that have died, across like different world wars and different, dictatorships. Like it is oftentimes this like messianic complex that leads to a lot of that. And so I don't know. I'm just like, I think I see it as entertainment more than anything else.
Yeah. On a more
Thought
practical
exercise.
note, like I go to the Wall Street Journal's website. I just try and search for an article, and they say, "Oh, search is powered by AI." It's not clear. It's clearly not powered by AI because I cannot fuzzy search at all. I can't say, "Oh, I know that it mentioned this person, and I think it was about this, and it was in the last week." It's not there. What does it take to actually roll this stuff out? Are these even potential customers of Chroma, or is there another company to be built here? What do you think about that?
Yeah. Wall Street Journal, if you're watching, send me an email. Happy to chat. All that's very doable today. I think that, the reality is that, your classic, the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed yet, right? Like, any technology of consequence, even if generationally important, still takes decades to roll out.
That makes sense.
And, that's just the same is true here. So.
That's great. Well, thanks so much for stopping by. We got to move on, but this was a fantastic conversation. We'll have to have you on again
thanks for coming
to
on,
talk
Jeff.
more.
Thanks,
Really
guys.
appreciate it. Talk to you soon.
Cheers.
Bye.